All right, it looks like we are live. Karen Straughan is here with me, another Good Intentions podcast. Now, did I say your name correctly, Karen?
You did. You did.
Okay, good. Cassie J was my guide there. I heard your name spoken by her on the red pill, and so I figured that was probably a pretty good source. She probably verified that. So
Yeah,
glad
there
to have
you
you
go.
here. Yeah.
Well, I mean, like it's if I answer the phone and they ask for Mrs. Strauchan or Mrs. Stranahan, I know exactly that
Indeed.
it's a telemarketer. And just
Yeah.
kidding.
Yeah. My name is Spanish in origin, but I always just pronounce it Rail, and so I hear all kinds of pronunciations as well. So I'm not at all a stranger to that. So, but thank you for joining me. I'm really glad to get to have the chance to converse with you. I've seen quite a few of your YouTube videos, not a lot. I've been doing this podcast for not a very long time. Kind of the intent is just to get people together to talk and figure out if we really have these irreconcilable differences that seem to be what people seem to think, and that there are evil people in the world, and if you disagree with me, well, you must be a Nazi and all this stuff. I had a conversation with Christina Hoff Sommers, and she was, of course, wonderful. I made a comment in there about that I kind of see feminists, well, I have some serious reservations about feminism, was one of my origins of kind of thinking differently than a lot of people. And I made the comment when I was talking to her that I kind of see feminism and men's rights as kind of two sides of the same thing. And I got some comments in YouTube after having said that about, well, that's not really fair, and that I should talk to you because I'm pretty uninformed about, the men's rights movement and some of those things. And I think that's there's probably a lot of truth to that. So I wanted to try to take that advice to heart and get a little bit more perspective in my view. So I'm really glad that we're going to have this chance to kind of hash some of that out.
Well, I do think that I do think that Christina Hoff Sommers is absolutely wonderful. She's an absolute sweetie. Offered me a nicotine lozenge once. So it's no, she's just a lovely, lovely person. But I do think that we do have a very rosy, sort of an unrealistically rosy view of what feminism was like in the second wave, in the first wave, in the pre-first wave era, from, say, the 1830s onward. We have not been given the full story of that. And so essentially what we learn in school is that the first wave of feminism was noble and it was only about equality full stop. And the second wave was about equal pay and, women's sexual freedom and freedom from this sort of the obligation of motherhood, and that was all great and it was just wonderful. But there has been this sort of vein of antagonism toward men through the whole thing, and their record as far as bringing about equality or bringing about fairness between men and women it's not a great track record, all the way back to the 1830s. It's really, they have not done a great job of making things equal. So I have a view of feminism that a lot of people don't have, and I think that the men's rights movement, I don't think that they are the other side of the coin necessarily. The men's rights movement positions itself in such a way as to deal with, because I'll give you an example, right? Early feminism, 1860s, when the default after divorce was paternal custody. So that was sort of the default, and there were many exceptions. And in fact, there were so many legal exceptions that you could bring into a courtroom that in some jurisdictions, custody was more likely to go to the mother, even though paternal custody was default. So, but it was the default. And instead of bringing about an equality of custody, so both parents after divorce will be equal custodians and guardians of their children, What they did was they just switched it to default mother custody, and that still is, we're still experiencing the hangover from that, even after equal rights legislation and all the laws became gender neutral in terms of their statutory wording and all of those things. We're still feeling the hangover from that. So that's not necessarily bringing about equality. And did it need to change? Absolutely, it needed to change. But they did not bring about any equality between men and women there. They actually brought about a female privilege. And part of that female privilege was paternal custody was the norm because men paid for everything. The father paid for everything. And when feminists changed that, first in the UK with the Infants Child Care of Infants Act in the 1860s, Custody of Infants Act, sorry. What happened is the custody went to the mother, but the financial obligation still remained fully on the father.
So that's origins there of kind of that's kind of setup, which I guess,
yeah. And I mean, they did the same thing with married women's property rights. They did not give married women equal access and equal administratorship of the marital properties. So, you would have his income, her income, his property, her property, and it would all be in one pool and it would be managed jointly by the two parties. What the law did was it actually separated her income out of that and her property out of that, but maintained the obligation, the financial obligation on men to provide all of the necessaries of life, food, shelter, clothing, even the tax burden on the wife's income and property was payable by him.
Wow.
But he no longer had access to her income to do any of those things. So these were not things that brought about equality in any sense of the word. And so essentially, I'm highly critical of feminism in all of its incarnations. And I don't think that the men's rights movement is, you even talk to feminists, they say, oh, well, if we think, Big Red in the movie, or not in the raw footage that has been recently uploaded, she says, we feminists think that if you're the better parent, you should get custody. But MRAs actually think that unless you're unfit, you should share custody.
You should have shared custody. Sure.
Yeah. So I don't think that we're the other side of the coin to feminists to any degree. So.
Yeah. So you've given an example there of I have this intuition, right, that the modern left sees historical oppression and thinks that the answer to that is to flip that on its head, right? And it's more of an intuition than really any kind of a real, a real sense of something. But you've just given an example of a real world example of exactly that the answer to oppression is to reverse the roles of oppressor and oppressed, I guess is kind of that's kind of a manifestation of this thing that I kind of sense might be something that some people have some inclination toward. Am I making sense there?
You are making sense. Like I would take it a step further and I would ask the question, were women actually oppressed? I mean, like women were subordinate to men back then, but they also enjoyed a whole host of protections under the law. In terms of entitlements and benefits and all of those things. And those were designed essentially, when back during patriarchy, when men were in charge, right? They said, okay, we need to find ways of protecting women from men who would abuse their authority, right? And they wrote all of these things into law. These were all built into coverture. Yes, she has to hand her property over to him, but she has avenues for redress through ecclesiastical courts, courts of common law, courts of equity, to actually complain that he's mismanaged her property, that he's not supporting her to the level to which she deserves, that he is capable of, given his economic status. Right. And protections for women and women alone against spousal violence, things like that. It wasn't technically against the law, but she could take it to a ecclesiastic or a equity court and apply for a security of the peace, a surety of the peace, which is like a peace bond. And the court would order him to cease and desist. hitting his wife, and if he continued to do so, now it's a matter for the criminal court because he's in contempt of court. So, I mean, there were all these protections for women. Now, what I see happening now is that men are expected to, what feminists seem to want is to flip things to what they believe was going on back then, which was women completely at the mercy of men, enjoying no legal protections whatsoever, civilly dead in the eyes of the law, unpersons, and just slaves. And they want to turn that around and do that on men. So, like, I don't expect, if we ever had a feminist government, I don't expect that men would enjoy any of the protections that women enjoyed back then, or any of the entitlements, or any of the benefits, right? All of those would still go to women. And what you would be left with is this underclass of men who would be essentially what they believe women were back then, which actually isn't the case if you actually go back and look at things. So, I mean, you would have essentially, they're trying to do away with alimony only since women have become payers of alimony to any degree whatsoever. They want, Sweden just got rid of affirmative action back in 2010 because it started to benefit men. And so you have, say, the Faculty of Veterinary Medicine, 95% women, and men are starting to benefit from affirmative action. And the moment that happens, right, they just cancel it. It's gone. It's outlawed now. It's been repealed.
I was completely unaware of that. So there is actually there are efforts in Sweden, or there were, or maybe affirmative action is set up there such that just by being in a minority, then special treatment is given.
It was because Sweden has very strict equality laws, and so essentially it became legal through the affirmative action law. It became legal for faculties like veterinary science and psychology, and all of these heavily female-dominated fields, to start using affirmative action to bring in men who maybe didn't have the same marks or whatever as women. And of course, then the complaint was that this, and I believe in the words of one of the Swedish ministers, was affirmative action laws do not exist to slam the door of opportunity in the face of talented young women. Right? Those laws only existed to help women. And the moment that men began to be able to take advantage of them, and in particular in these fields that are like 95% women, they just did away with affirmative action altogether. And they said, okay, we're not going to do this anymore.
Wow.
Right now that women are 60% of university students, now that men are the ones benefiting. So.
Wow. Yeah, I guess that's very different from an affirmative action that has explicit, right, to allow specific groups to have it more of a just toward anybody who is, or toward equality, whatever that means, right? So yeah, it's interesting, So I think one of the things that really struck me about the document that James Damore wrote was kind of the questioning of the assumption that everything should be 50-50, right? Which I think is a reasonable question to ask. And, I saw one interview with him where he it was the David Pakman show, and David Pakman, he told him that women often have other options because they have both mathematical reasoning skills as well as verbal skills, and they have other options. And Pakman's response was, oh, so you think that men should be given special preference, right? Which I guess is kind of emblematic of a mentality of that equality is always the objective, that everything should be 50-50 in terms of group breakdown.
I don't even understand how, maybe James didn't word it very well, but I don't understand how David Pakman could have gotten there to that men deserve special treatment, when basically both men and women who have both high math and high verbal ability tend to not choose to go into STEM fields. They tend, because they have more options, they choose other things. They choose to go into psychology or business or whatever. They don't tend to go into particularly things like physics and mathematics and computer science and all of these really dry kind of fields, engineering and stuff like that, they don't, it's because I'm going to tell you a secret. Okay. Most people find that shit boring. Okay. I find it excruciatingly boring myself. And my boyfriend works in those fields, and he tries to explain to me what he did today with this coding language or that coding library. And I'm just like, I don't want to hear it. Don't make me, grab the nearest knife or pair of scissors and threaten to hurt myself if he doesn't stop talking, because it bores the crap out of me. Now, if I only had high math ability and I sucked at everything else, right, that would be my only option, really, realistically, to have any kind of decent income. Yeah. And this is across the board. Both men and women are much less likely to go into any of those fields if they also have high verbal ability. So, and it just happens to be that men outnumber women in that category of people with only high math ability and low to moderate verbal ability. So he's saying, so men deserve special treatment. No, what he's saying is these men are going into the only field that they possibly can succeed at. And the rest of the men and the women who are not situated in that way have better options, and they're opting for them. Right? It's not like they're being kept out. Like I just that these nerdy guys who can't string a sentence together in a social way, right? That they are being treated to special treatment, and that they're enjoying some kind of affirmative action because they lack verbal ability. No, it's just they're the only ones applying.
Yeah. Well, what James was saying was clear to me. And as I was listening to it, it was just striking to me that David Pakman saw this other thing that James wasn't saying. But I think it's not so much a psychopathy or anything like that. I think it's just a matter of that seeing the world differently. And when you're looking through a lens of I value equality over other things, then that's kind of the direction that you take this kind of thing. And what you're saying there too. I mean, I'm case in point of that. Right? I mean, of course, anecdotally, right? Just my story doesn't tell the whole story, but I'm a software engineer myself as well. And I have those same experiences of, my wife asks me, well, what did you do today? And I'm like, well, do you want me to tell you and it's going to bore you to death? Or do you want me to tell you that, I solved a couple problems and that's the extent of it, right? So, I know exactly what that is. It's interesting too that, my test scores throughout all of my history told me that I was good at both, mathematical reasoning as well as verbal. But I didn't really believe that I was socially adept for a majority of my life. And I'm finding that as I kind of jumped into a podcasting journey and I started interviewing software developers for my other podcast, I'm starting to learn that, hey, you know what? I am technical and non-technical both, right? And for years, I've been telling myself that I'm good at machines, not good with humans. And, that I became a software engineer with that attitude, I think is not at all surprising. And now that I have become a podcaster and I'm finding that I really like conversing with people and that there are some other doors, I'm kind of thinking that, well, you know what? I still like software a lot, but, it may not be my ultimate career destination, and I have some other options now. And it's, I don't know what the future holds. I don't picture a day when I'm going to stop coding altogether, but I don't see it as, the most important thing in my career anymore.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it's, when you look at somebody like James Damore, because he's very careful in what he says, and he thinks, I mean, you can sort of almost see the gears turning in his head when you ask him a question and he's attacking the question from a variety of angles. And then he kind of comes out with usually a very brief answer because he's got all of that sort of classic sort of nerdy social awkwardness, doesn't like to be in the spotlight, all of those things. And I'm actually quite impressed with the caliber of his memo in terms of, his capability to write something like that. When I then look at how uncomfortable he is sometimes when he's being interviewed, right?
Yeah. Well, and I think he's gotten a lot better, right? I mean, you compare him with Straughan Molyneux to him with Dave Rubin, and he is a confident. I mean, the confidence is, the difference is you know,
It
it's
builds
unmistakable.
up.
Yeah.
It does. It does. And, running a podcast, that'll help you hone those skills too, right?
No
And
question.
90% of your confidence is, it's not necessarily based on your skill level. It's usually based on just getting comfortable with something. And that's usually what I tell people who are scared of, people who went at conferences that I go to or whatever. There was a panel discussion that I did just on Sunday where a 16-year-old girl was telling her story. And she's, I'm so nervous. I'm so nervous. And it's just like, you'll be fine. And then you do 3 more and it'll be old hat. You won't even blink. You won't get dry mouth, nothing. Right. You'll just be able to get up in front of a room full of people and tell your story. So
yeah. So you,
yeah.
right? I want to find out more about you, right? I've heard you mention in some of your videos, right, that I'm a waitress or something along those lines, right? You have this unpretentious air about you, and yet you are making these videos. You're interacting with some of the finest minds that I've come across, right? And it seems like that you have kind of this humble air about you. And one other thing too, right? I've been told by some folks that, I've never touched marijuana in my life, right? And the libertarian that I am, right? I'm all for legalization, and some people have told me that, well, that lends some credibility because it's not self-serving that you say this. It's it's that it's something for you. And I wonder about this this interest that you have in men's issues. If there's, it seems like there's probably some added credibility, being that you are not the victim of these things directly anyway. Can you just tell me a little bit about who are you and how did you get involved with all of this?
Well, I'm a university dropout. I cooked for a while, then I waited tables, stumbled across the men's movement, started reading, and I was always one of those people, like the reason I dropped out of university was the reason that I would have dropped out of high school if I had believed my parents wouldn't have murdered me and buried me in the, in the backyard. I just absolutely hated school, detested it. And but it wasn't anything to do with my abilities. I actually always got really good marks. I just couldn't stand it. And, so I went and I worked a regular job and got married and had kids and got divorced and stumbled on the men's movement sort of right in the midst of negotiating my divorce and dealing with all of that over the course of about 1.5 years, and started reading. And I had always been kind of one of these people who was like, these feminists are complete kooks. Like, how can they actually believe that they're living in this world that they claim that we're all living in? Like, I don't understand how they believe that there is this patriarchy out there that subordinates women, when all politicians do, whether they're male or female, is pander to the female voter base. And when laws protect women, like domestic violence and sexual assault law only exist because of women victims and male perpetrators. I mean, if they were developed specifically to deal with male perpetrators and female victims, and they have become sexually gender neutral over time in terms of the statutes, but they still overwhelmingly focus on female victims and male perpetrators. So when you have this class of people that it gets extra protection, they get extra benefits from government, they get extra this, extra that, they're, and how can you argue that, because men are in charge, or the majority of people in charge are men, that women are not being looked after, when you have this massively powerful feminist lobby that's pushing through all of this legislation and policy and everything else? Like, I felt like they were living in upside down land. Right. Yeah. And so the more I looked into it and the more I realized just how far their hooks are into all of those things: legislation, policy, media, social work, right? Everything that affects people's lives and relationships, right? The moment I realized that, I was like, okay, yeah, I need to start really thinking about this. And when I met the guy that I'm with now, and part of the reason why I was so attracted to him was because of how he felt about his daughter, who he hasn't seen in, oh God, 8 years now.
Oh, wow.
And she's not biologically his. This is the thing, right? He raised her for 6 years from, you know, toddler, not even a toddler, not even crawling yet. And then it was just like that easy for the mother of that child to say, yeah, you're never seeing her again. He has no legal recourse. The only legal recourse he has is, you know, the 2 lawyers that he talked to. They said, if you don't have $20,000 of disposable income every single year to devote to this, you might as well not bother, because she has a free legal aid attorney as the custodial parent. And she will fight you every step of the way. And every time she denies, you know, even if you get a court order for access, when she denies you access and you have to take it to court, all the judge is going to do is tell her to not do it again, right? And you're going to be back exactly where you were. And this is, like they said, this is not, if unless you're very financially well off, there's no point. And that's if you get a court order for access and any kind of paternal rights, which is no guarantee, despite the fact that, you know, as having taken on the role of father in this girl's life, she could have come after him for child support, and she would have got it automatically because he took a fatherly role.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. In Alberta, all you need to do is live with a woman and her children for 6 months. And if you help them brush their teeth, read them bedtime stories, do any childcare whatsoever, you're on the hook for child support. If she
so both child support and no access, right? I mean, that combination, that seems,
you don't get automatic rights, even as a biological father. If you are not in a common law or married relationship with the mother, you don't get automatic rights to your child. You get automatic child support, you get automatic responsibilities. But then you still have to apply in court for any kind of rights to guardianship, custody, visitation, access, any of that. So, and you have to do that at your own expense while you're paying child support. So, and she has a free attorney to fight you. So it's just, when I was looking at that and the way he felt about his daughter, right? And that was one of the things that really pulled me into a relationship with him. And I felt like, you know, okay, now there's 2 of us again, and I'm not working 50, 60 hours a week. There's 2 of us earning. I can scale down my hours at work, and I can actually start writing about this online and all of this. And he was very supportive of me, suggested that I start a blog. Stop just commenting on Reddit, go start a blog, suggested I start a YouTube channel, you know, did all of those things to help me, you know, all of the things people do, right? Oh, you need a webcam. Oh, you need this. Oh, you need that. Let me help you get all those things. And I just found that I was really good at it, at talking about these things and about understanding the male position. I think, better than a lot of other people do. So it was just a natural thing for me to transition into doing it more and more. And then when he landed a really good job, I didn't even quit. I just, you know, I kept on saying, you know, remove me from these. Okay, 1 day a week. I'll stay 1 day a week waitressing. And then finally my boss phoned me, you know, a month after the last time I had worked. And she said, well, you know, Cassie forgot to put you on the schedule because she forgot that you even exist. And if you get a pink slip in the mail, it's not because I fired you. It's just because head office would have done that with you not being on the schedule for so long. And I said, well, you know, maybe it's just not worth the bother of keeping me on. And she says, you know, you're probably right.
Wow.
And, you know, good luck with everything and all of that. And so it was just, I didn't even quit. It just kind of happened.
Yeah. You found something
So,
that is really a passion for you, right? And it's
yes.
something that's well, very personal too. It's not just a detached interest. It's real, right? There's something really cool about it, or not cool, but something really that really drives you to try to help people to have a better existence.
Well, and it's not just that. I mean, like I have had to make some concessions to reality over the years of doing this. I used to sort of have this vision of an egalitarian society where men and women would actually be treated equally, legally and socially and the whole bit, and there would be equal compassion for both by from society and all of those things. And I ended up having to ditch any kind of sense of a goal, an overarching goal, um, and a philosophy in terms of what I want things to look like. Because the more I read about this stuff, the more unlikely that seems to be a possibility. And then on top of that, the more I have invested in an outcome, the less likely I'm willing to look at counter or contrary
Sure.
evidence, right?
Yeah.
And so I adjusted that. But a lot of what drives me is just trying to figure out what's going on, trying to figure out what makes humans capable of being convinced that the world is so upside down, or is upside down from what it really is. Trying to figure out how humans became what we are. That's like a big one for me right now. I've been reading research papers on chimpanzees and bonobos like mad the last little while, as well as early humans. And so, I mean, we're, so it's sort of like an overarching obsession with me that doesn't necessarily, I mean, there is that sort of compassionate element. There's that element of wanting to help improve things and all of that. But it's morphed into a multifaceted thing. So if I'm feeling depressed one day because there's no way I see that it could be fixed, well, at least I can motivate myself in terms of, okay, I'm going to go read about bonobos for a while and try and figure something else out, right? So, I mean, it's become a very broad set of motivations and a broad set of things that I want to talk about and want to learn about. So
yeah. So you talked about kind of, I don't know if mentor relationship would be right, but right, helping people to speak at conferences and some of those things. Was that something that was easy for you to get into?
I actually, the first time I spoke in front of a camera, I was really nervous, like for YouTube. I was very, very nervous. But the first time, and it wasn't that long afterwards that I spoke in front of a room full of about 100 people, it was just easy. It was
Nice.
like, I didn't have butterflies in my stomach, nothing. It was just, I just went up and it was very strange because it was at a libertarian conference and, or convention. And there's this array of people and they're all like kind of looking at me like this and they're scribbling on their notepads and they're, and I'm thinking, oh God, these people hate me. Right. Oh, well, just get through it. And, but they were so intensely watching, without any kind of real facial responses or anything. And they were like scribbling away so fast because it was all stuff that they had never really heard talked about. And the first guy in the question and answer period said, I come to these things every year and I'm always hearing about gun control and gun rights and the police state and legalizing drugs and the drug war and this, that, and the other, and this is the first time in 20 years I've ever heard something new. Thank you. Right?
Wow, cool.
So yeah, that was actually pretty cool. So
yeah, that is a different audience, right? I mean, being a libertarian myself, I'm familiar with the rationalist kind of emphasis that we have in our communities, and that the harsh criticism that can come from anything that's not completely consistent, and all of that kind of stuff. So yeah, I can imagine that would be. I would expect it to be nerve-wracking. It's interesting that you did have that level of comfort with it.
Well, I was like, okay, well, if they hate me, they hate me. I mean, I think at that
Yeah.
point I had gotten enough really negative feedback in comment sections and stuff like that, and people arguing with me and the whole bit that it. I had come to the point at that stage of things that there are some people who are just not going to be convinced. There are some people who are just going to absolutely hate the fact that someone like me exists, and I'm just going to have to live with that. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you said something in the red pill, right, that we've mentioned a few times that really spelled out for me what it is about feminism that rubs me the wrong way. You were talking about that feminists often cite the power of words, right? The importance of words and choosing your words. And you kind of used that as kind of the springboard for that, feminism claims not to be misandry driven. I'm not quite sure how to formulate the words there. But using terms like patriarchy and toxic masculinity is basically demonizing men in a lot of ways. I don't know. I don't know if there's really a question there. That really appealed to me. That was something that I could really take away. I think that articulates what bothers me a lot about it.
Well, what I found hilarious was, because I did in the question and answer period after the New York premiere of The Red Pill, Michael Kimmel, who appeared in the film, he was there. He's a feminist professor at the State University of New York at Stony Brook, I believe. And he also is the senior editor of a journal called Men and Masculinities or something like that. And so, I mean, he sees himself as an expert on feminism and on men. And I brought up toxic masculinity and the power of the language. And he says, well, do you know what toxic masculinity is? Like what is meant when that's being talked about? And I said, yeah, of course, because he says, because, in terms of the academic use of the term, right, it's very, very different from the idea that all masculinity is toxic. And I said, well, okay, so I'm an 8-year-old boy, right? Have I taken a women's studies course to teach me that that's not what's meant by that term? No, I just hear it all over the place, right? And you just throw these words around like confetti, like they're completely harmless. What's a young boy to think when he hears that phrase? Toxic masculinity.
Yeah, I think you make a great point there, and I associating the negative aspects of masculinity, I guess, is what's meant by that. I guess I'm not completely sure. I mean, I assume that has to do with aggression and some of these things that you see more from men, right? But like James Damore talks about all the time, right? That we have distributions, these things overlap to significant degrees, and women are aggressive as well, right? So to say that is, I think we're talking about toxic aggression. To label it toxic masculinity, well, I think that does, it does impugn a gender, and it's surprising that a feminist would calling somebody a nag, right, because they're a woman. I guess it's largely the same thing, right? So is that toxic femininity then?
Well, it should be. It should be nagging, relational aggression, so cattiness and backstabbing,
manipulation,
mean girl behavior, queen bee behavior. Hypergamy, gold digging, all of those types of behaviors, being a tease, right? Being a cock tease, that should be, and then, because there is something women get out of that when they do those things, when they actually get a man to the point where he is extremely aroused and really wants to have sex, and then they pull away and say, oh, no, right?
I think I would agree with that if it's a deliberate act, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if I have some reservations.
It's not necessarily a conscious act, right? But there is some kind of emotional kickback that they get from that in terms of I'm so hot, right? And I just rejected this guy, which means I have elevated status, because men gain status, at least in terms of the sexual arena, Men gain status from the number of women that they can convince to have sex with them, right? Whether they have sex with them or not, the number of women that they could convince to do so, right? And women gain sexual status in their female hierarchy by the subject without, without being plummeted into the, okay, that's it, she's not worth the bother, by everybody, right? So if you are able as a woman to safely reject 99% of males and get the Brad Pitt, right, you are a top dog, in that pile. And so that exercise of enticing a man and arousing him and getting his attention and getting his desire, right, and then rejecting him, actually gives a woman a feeling of elevated status. So whether that's a conscious behavior or not is not necessarily, I think aggression in men often is not a conscious behavior, right? It's not like they go out and they say, well, I'm going to pick a fight at the bar tonight, right? And this is my rational decision to do so. No, it's largely subconscious as well. And there are reasons why that behavior is more likely to happen in men than it is in women. Women are more likely to play let's you and him fight. That's how they do the fight in the bar thing, is they orchestrate a confrontation between their man and some other guy.
Yeah.
Right. And so these are all kinds of things that, there are gendered behaviors in men that are extremely harmful. There are gendered behaviors in women, behaviors that are more common in women that are extremely harmful as well. When we pretend that those behaviors don't exist, when we pretend, or that they are not as harmful as they are. And the idea, what feminists would, the words that they would use to describe what I would call toxic femininity, if we're going to be equal, right? Toxic behaviors, toxic masculinity, toxic femininity, they would call internalized misogyny. So by naming it in that way, it removes any responsibility from women. And it seems like an edict from the patriarchy that women are brainwashed by the patriarchy in order to behave these ways. So it still casts blame on men for what women are doing to others and to each other.
Yeah, I've heard that. That's the way Big Red framed that, right? That all of these things that are negative for men, well, they were set up by men, and it is the patriarchy that is responsible for this, and therefore it's really more men being against men than it is anything. No responsibility from femininity, or it's still right oppression by men. I want to emphasize. I think you make sense, right, with this sexual hierarchy, status seeking, and different forms of status for different genders. I don't object to that. I want to emphasize, to me, I still stand by, call me a feminist if you will, but nobody ever has to do anything that they don't want to do. And this whole, Kobe Bryant rape case argument of, well, she was in the hotel room, therefore she wanted it. Consent is still consent to me. And I think no is acceptable at any time. Though I think there is such a thing as this tease phenomenon that you're talking about there, but I think I would probably
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's not illegal to be a tease, right? And it's absolutely illegal for a man to essentially say, okay, you teased me, so therefore you owe me. And we're going to do this. That's absolutely against your will. That's absolutely rightfully illegal to do that. But you do have to look at the entire picture and the entire spectrum of behaviors. I mean, men are now being, they're being socially castigated for things like mansplaining and manspreading and manterrupting and, for catcalling and wolf whistling and saying good morning to a woman on the street and, asking her for the time and expecting her to, telling women to smile, telling a woman to cheer up when they see a woman who's feeling sad is apparently now a microaggression, and it's misogyny. And he feels entitled to her smile. And it's like, no, maybe he's just seeing a woman who's sad and he wants to make her feel better because he has compassion for her. Right.
Yeah.
And it's just like, he's just like, well, it can't be so bad. Right. That and this is the things that parents tell their children, things, things can't be so horrible that you can't muster a smile, right?
Yeah.
And if they are, you know, what can I do to help? And so, I mean, like, there seems to be this, and yet when it comes to these harmful female behaviors, right? I was just reading a study, or a report on a study that was done on 265 university-age women, that found 40% of them had engaged in coercive tactics in order to prevent a man from using a condom during sex.
What?
Yes.
What does coercive mean there?
Coercive means, you know, well, in a few, you know, in a small percentage of the cases, it was actually physical force. Sometimes it was sabotaging the condom, breaking, tearing the condom, the only one that they
subversive,
have,
yeah.
right? Getting him to the point where he's so aroused that she knows he's not going to say no, and then essentially saying, I'm not going to go through with it unless we do bareback. And they actually found that women who had a history of STIs were more likely to engage in this behavior. I don't know whether it's that's a chicken and egg kind of thing. They don't know whether it's because they have STIs that they're just like, fuck it, I'm going to spread them around because fuck that guy who gave it to me and I'm getting revenge on all men. Or whether it's because they have a propensity to engage in the behavior that they have a higher likelihood of STIs in their history. But right now in the media, stealthing, you know, sort of that trying to get away with not using a condom is that's considered to be a male perpetrated thing. That's considered to be like 100% on the man. And every single woman on the face of the planet would insist on a condom. And it's men who are trying to get out of using them, right? When in reality, it's two-way street. And, you know, when you're not even allowed to look at human behaviors and say women do this too, right? Yeah. Because that would be blaming women, or that would actually be painting women with a broad brush. So, you know, so that we're not allowed to say that hypergamy is a thing. We're not allowed to say that gold digging is a predominantly female behavior, right? Being a gold digger. We're not allowed to call any of these women on it. And if we do, right, it's never the woman's fault, right? You're not even allowed to say the decision to bring a child into the world after conception happens is 100% in the hands of the woman. That is her decision, 100%. He has no choice. Why are we making him pay equally for decisions that only she can make, right? Yeah. Yeah. When you say that, apparently what you're arguing is that men should be able to force women to have abortions.
It is striking, yes, that that abortion has become a women's issue, right? I mean, to me, it's a question of, right, first of all, is this a human person, a citizen that has rights? And that's a question that has nothing to do with whether it's you know, whether it's women's rights or not. But it is striking that, yes, I mean, the argument about a woman's body and her right to choose what to do with her body, I think there is a lot of leg to stand on as that being an argument. But at the same time, yes, you know, if a man has been involved in an act of procreation, then he really has no say in the thing, and that might be how it has to be, but it's an unenviable. Can I get that word out? It's not a very good position to be in, to where you're involved in this thing, but you really have no recourse for, you know, for what. Well,
it's, you know, like I think most MRAs, and this is one of the things, like most MRAs don't want the right to force a woman to abort or to force a woman to carry a child to term. What most MRAs would like would be maybe compassion for men who find themselves in that situation, sympathy for them, but it's almost like even just asking for people to understand that this is a difficult situation. It's a situation that can't change. We cannot change it, but it's difficult for a man to be stuck in that situation, that he wants the child, the woman doesn't, or that he does not want the child and the woman does. And so we're not even allowed to feel compassion for these guys, because that might actually sort of hint at that what these women are doing is not nice or something.
Well, there are other stakeholders besides just that woman.
Yeah, I know. And then you have, you know, the sort of the legal paternal surrender crowd, or another term for it would be financial abortion, where a man would be able to say, I don't want rights to this child, and I will not take responsibility for this child because I did not have anything, I did not want this child, right? We agreed not to have this child, and she got pregnant intentionally. Maybe she got pregnant by accident, right? It's an accident. It's not my fault. Yeah. And I shouldn't be held responsible for something that, I mean, there's such a thing as an accidental pregnancy, but there is no such thing as accidental childbirth or accidental motherhood. Those are choices, yeah, on the part of women. And so for a man to actually, his decision to have sex with that one woman that one time, no matter how careful he is, that means that he is sort of de facto and de jure choosing in that moment to be a father.
Yeah, yeah.
And all of the arguments that I hear from feminists against giving men the choice, giving men the option of walking away from responsibility and waiving their rights is, you know, he should have thought of that. You know, he made his decision when he had sex. He should have thought of that and kept it in his pants. If he didn't want to be a father, right, he shouldn't have had sex with her. And those are all anti-choice arguments.
Those are all exactly, yeah,
who want to protest abortion.
That's yeah, exactly what the pro-life crowd says. Yes, yeah, yeah. That is striking.
Like, are you feminists even listening to yourself? You know, are you for equality or not? Right? And in what universe is a child and their mother going to starve because you couldn't get that $50 out of that paper route of that young boy who was raped by an older woman?
Yeah, I've heard
she
those
served prison time from it. She served prison time for it, right? And got custody of her child back when she was released, went on welfare, and welfare goes after this freaking kid, $50 a month out of his paper route for child support.
Wow.
Plus all of the back child support from the time that the kid was born.
Yeah.
When he was 14.
Yeah. So I guess I've come to the conclusion here so far that, well, I think I was already there to say that, yes, there are very legitimate men's issues, right? And that the men's rights movement has a lot of reason to exist. And, you know, I would not go as far to say that all of feminism is wrong either. I mean, I think there are some serious issues facing women, and there's a lot of those things. I guess you talked about compassion, right? Sympathy for people in these situations. And I guess to go back to this whole street harassment thing, right? And I think that here's where I get a bit of a feeling that, you know, two sides of the same coin as far as feminism and men's rights is that, you know, I hear feminists saying that, you know, we're being harassed on the streets. We're getting all of this unwanted attention. It's really unpleasant. And I think there's a point to that, right? I mean, to not be able to walk down the street without, you know, I think it is probably more annoyance than anything, which is probably something that part of me says, you know, okay, get over it. I would love to be in that situation, right? But at the same time, if it is constant, it's a barrage. It's something that does take away from the quality of your life, and I think sympathy for that is warranted. And, you know, at the same time, right, the man that I've been for a majority of my life, the just desperately wanting attention from women. And being in that situation where, you know, that same woman who has more attention than she can handle, right? And thinking, what I wouldn't give to be in that situation, right?
Even just for a day, yeah. Even just for one day, right? To be in a situation where there are women throwing themselves at me. Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
No, and it's, I mean, this is one of the things that I think that most men understand, and you can see it in the fact that, you know, like there are these initiatives, and a lot of these initiatives are sponsored by corporations. They're sponsored by, you know, so the anti-harassment kind of policies. You know, they're sponsored by governments. We have all of these things, right? Speak up, speak out. You know, men's organizations designed to, you know, teach men or teach boys how to, you know, respect women and all of this stuff, right? There's all of this public conversation about it, and men are very much in support of that in general. In terms of, I mean, most of the men these days, you know, who are in their 40s, 50s, 60s, who are in any position to actually be able to put money into, you know, a program, an initiative, whatever, right? They grew up, you know, where there were like 2 rules in the house, right? 1 was respect your mother, and 2 was never disrespect your mother. And their dad would kick their ass if they broke either one of them. Yeah. So, I mean, but what we have is we have an inability, I think, on the part of, and you see it in some of the rhetoric on about nice guys trademark. I don't know if you've read any of the feminist writings about that. Their whole position on that is nice guys online who complain about being friend zoned by the women that they are, you know, have a crush on or whatever. And the attitude toward them when men talk about not getting any sexual attention from women, not having any sexual success from women, even when they follow all the rules that they've been taught since they were young, respect women, treat them well, be helpful, be kind, be gallant and not goofus. I don't know if you guys used to get those things, and I'm really dating myself.
Not those specific words, but yeah, and, the gist.
You had the 2 guys. One was named Goofus, and the other was named Gallant, and it was when I was in elementary school. We had to read those stories, but anyhow, so everybody all these guys follow the rules that you know, and the advice of people who are telling them, you know, well, just be nice, just be kind, just be generous, just be a gentleman, just be this, just be that, right? And it just doesn't work. And at the same time, they're seeing a whole bunch of guys out there who are complete dicks getting a lot of, you know, being able to pull a lot of tail, to put it bluntly. Sure. And they're like, what the hell is going on? Like, why is it so difficult for me? Why are these girls that I really like friend zoning me all the time? You know, saying, you know, when I finally make the overture, you know, I've demonstrated that I'm nice, right? I've followed the whole freaking playbook, and I make an overture, and they say, no, I just want to be friends. Yeah. What's going on here? And you have feminists saying essentially that to even ask that question shows that they feel that they're entitled to women's bodies, and that they think that women are just like vending machines that dispense sex. And if you put niceness coins in them, right, they owe you sex in return. And there was a beautiful post on it at Slate Star Codex, where he said essentially, you know, if, you know, I have this, he's a psychiatrist, I think he's an intern or resident or something like that. And he sort of gave this sort of hypothetical story of this Black patient that comes in who's on the verge of a nervous breakdown, and he's working 2 minimum wage jobs just to keep his head above water, and he can't manage to save any money, and he's living on ramen noodles, and he's getting to the point where he's so exhausted and so stressed out that he's probably going to lose one or both of his jobs, and then he's going to be losing his apartment and the whole bit, right? And he says, you know, like, why is it that for some people it's so easy to get by, right? And he's, you know, saying, you know, I see these kids, a lot of them are white kids, right? With, you know, they got a legacy scholarship to Yale, right? Admission at Yale, and, you know, and they just seem to phone it in, and it all just comes easy to them, right? And it's because they, I guess, started off in a different position or whatever, right? And the guy, the blogger says, you know, I don't know that I have an answer for that man, but, you know, as I was surfing online tonight, I realized that the worst answer I could possibly give him is, you know, if you think that employers owe you anything, you know, people who describe themselves as hard workers, trademark, right? You know, really, they just feel like they're entitled to other people's money, right? And companies would do well to give you a wide berth because you are probably the kind of person who will steal from your employer and blah, 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 right? And he says, that answer is so unjust and so antisocial that it could only have come from the social justice community.
Wow. Yeah.
Right? But that's the answer that the social justice and the feminist communities give to men who feel like, you know, I'm following all the rules. I'm doing everything even feminists are telling me I should do. And I cannot find romantic success. What's going on? I see all these assholes who don't follow these rules getting all of this success. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
I feel like, you know, like I've been lied to. And apparently that's what feminists think about them, is that there is no compassion. They have to actually demonize the nice guys.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because the nice guys are complaining about their situation. Well, if I demonized every feminist who complained about everything in her life, I'd spend, well, I do spend a lot of time, not demonizing feminists, but picking apart their complaints. But, you know, there really seems to be a lack of compassion and a lack of understanding of exactly what men are saying when they're actually talking about their problems.
Yeah.
Right. Just like that whole, I don't think that I should be locked into 21 to 26 years of child support for one mistake. And the mistake was I trusted the woman when she said she was on birth control. Right. To have some compassion for that guy. Right. They want to twist it to say, well, he just wants to have the right to make her abort that child.
Yeah. He has a stake in that thing, right? Is the ultimate. And I wouldn't want anybody to force anyone to have an abortion, nor would I want to force anyone to carry a child to term, right? I think there's, you know, I mean, there is an argument to say that that is a human being, and it's complicated. And I think that, you know, the people in abortion debates saying, you know, oh, you're baby killers, oh, you hate women. Well, you know what? It's much more nuanced than either of those positions, and you know,
the real test is going to come when we actually have an artificial womb, right, that can bring a child to term, and the man will be able to say, when the woman decides to abort, I want the fetus removed alive, raised in the artificial womb. I will take custody and I will get child support from her. Yeah. And we will see how many feminist heads explode over that, and how they're going to pretzelize reality and their arguments in order to describe that as an injustice, while what we do to men these days, and even boys these days, is not an injustice.
You have a science fiction novel on your hands there. I think I'm ready for the kind of the Atlas Shrugged that tells the story inside of a story, right? That sounds awesome. I think there's something to that.
That might be a good idea. To do a story about a court case over something like that.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah. So I think with the idea of don't harass me on the street, right? To me, it's, you know, if you tell me, right, I do not like this and please refrain from these activities, right? That's, you know, question asked, request received, and happy to acquiesce, right? Happy to happy to humor you on that, right? When it's, you know, you are a harasser and you are a bad person and all of these things, then, you know, not necessarily myself, but I can certainly understand how it's, you know, well, you know, I'm not that, and doubling down on that behavior and all of those kinds of things. It's interesting too that every romantic comedy that I can think of, as I kind of scan through my mind here, right? It's the same script, right? It's that you know, man makes overture, woman rejects that, and he persists, and ultimately she sees the diamond in the rough that he is, and you know, and then things go on, right? I mean, the script of every chick flick is the thing that the feminists are telling us that is harassment.
Oh yeah, no, I mean, like I wrote erotica for quite a while, and one of the hilarious things is you know, like, the romance fiction genre is essentially slightly more than 50% of the entire fiction market. And it's written almost exclusively by women, and it's written for a female target audience. You have a little bit of a market for gay men reading gay romances, but actually more women read gay romances than gay men do. More straight women, and more lesbians write gay male romances than and straight women than gay men do. But yeah, no, it's very, it's the romance aspect of it, and you know, and a lot of these are very highly eroticized, and what you actually have is a situation where male sexual dominance within the relationship, and emotional dominance, and all of those things that feminists would describe as toxic. So male stoicism and not sharing their feelings, being brooding and mysterious and taciturn, and all of these things, and maybe angry and lashing out and aggressing against others and being willing to commit violence, and all of these things, right? These are all embodied in the hero. Yeah. And also he is usually, almost always, much sought after by women. He is the guy who he is the guy who has, usually in his past, convinced many women to have sex with him, and could continue to convince many women to have sex with him. And then he finds the heroine, and through the magic of her particular vagina, she ensnares him in her love web, and now he's faithful only to her, but he's still, you know, a guy that women throw themselves at, and he could still get all the women that, you know. So I mean, all of these things that feminists are saying that men should not, I mean, like, honestly, it's almost like pickup artists should really, they should really be using women's, especially the more eroticized forms of women's romance fiction, as a template for getting women to have sex with them. Right? And some of these romances are so insane in that way that, you know, you literally have, there's a couple of what I would call rape scenarios in romance novels between the heroine and the hero, and they usually occur within the first 50 or so pages. And the first one is that the hero actually rapes the heroine, like actually rapes her. Like she is really not into it. She is saying no. She is screaming no in her mind, right? And then he spends the next 200, 300 pages convincing her that if she knew him back then the way she knows him now, she would have consented, right? And then it's all better, and they live happily ever after.
Wow.
Okay. Oh yeah. And
I'm not going to get behind that as an idealized scenario.
Yeah, no. And then there's another scenario where she resists physically, and then at some kind of 11th hour type moment, in the privacy of her brain, without telling him, she decides, yes, I really want to go through with this, and then they have sex, right? So you have a rape, because he's a rapist, because he believes that she's not consenting, and yet we have no victim because she consented in the privacy of her mind. And then she goes on to marry a man who would commit rape, and live happily ever after with him. And I'm thinking to myself, like, these books really appeal to women. They appeal to women so much that they dominate the entire fiction market. This one specific genre of books, right, sells more copies than any other type of book and all other types of books combined, right, to women. And it's, you know, like, it's not every romance novel that has these two scenarios in them, but there's lots of them, and they're often very, very popular. And I'm thinking to myself, you know, the whole feminist thing, right, with the men should not be aggressive, men should never be bold, men should, you know, do these feminists not understand what women are like and what turns women on? And no woman wants to actually be raped, right? At least no woman who is, I guess, psychologically healthy would want to actually be raped. But there is that aspect of the man taking the lead, the man making the moves, the man pushing boundaries, right? And all of those things that really, really turn women on, right? Mm-hmm. And so you're basically asking men to put every single tool in their toolkit that is actually effective in convincing women to want to have sex with them, and just put that away, right? Because I guess because it's not politically correct to behave in that way, right? They're gonna go with what gets results, right? And what gets results is not a man who asks permission at every stage of a sexual encounter. That just doesn't. Yeah. It just doesn't do it for women.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the rape stuff, I mean, that kind of makes my skin crawl to think that is really, the truth.
You have to realize it's not what women want, but it is kind of, it just like men probably don't want to, most men probably don't want to look like He-Man or like Duke Nukem, right? With these gigantic arms, right? But it's an exaggeration of what men would like to look like, right? And so these scenarios in these books, I think, are a fictionalized exaggeration of what women are actually really looking for.
I see. But yeah, the man that takes charge is the one that is appealing, and that is I don't think there's much question about that. And I mean, yeah. The feminist male, right, is kind of this caricature, this stereotype of the feminist male being this, wishy-washy, there's
doormat.
Doormat. That's exactly the right term. I mean, that does manifest in real life, and I think.
Oh, have you ever watched male feminists stand up in a question and answer period, and they'll stand up to ask a question, and they will say, okay, first off, I want to acknowledge the fact that, I'm male and I'm straight and I'm white and, I'm not disabled. And so I want to acknowledge my privilege. And and it's like, and don my hair shirt and all of this other stuff. And that is so, it's a really sad thing to see. It's a really sad thing to see anybody do just by default in any kind of conversation. And you can acknowledge that, me as a white person, I'm not going to be speaking, I'm not going to pretend to be speaking on behalf of all Black people, right? But I will say that, Black people face certain forms of discrimination in our society and certain stereotypes and all of this stuff, right? And I acknowledge that, but, I'm not speaking on behalf of all Black people. Yes, that, but not saying, well, I'm privileged, and so I'm incapable of empathizing with the situation of the people that I'm speaking about. This is one of those things, I've never apologized or checked my privilege as a woman. I've acknowledged that it's easier for me as a woman to advocate for men's issues than it is for men, for sure. And it's not all just about the sort of appearance of not being self-interested, but it's also about, I appear less threatening than a man. My voice is not as low as a man's. I have all the cuteness of women. I'm not craggy and bearded and all of this stuff. I'm not going to be perceived to be angry, or if I do get angry, I'm not going to be perceived to be dangerous.
Yeah.
All of those things. And because I'm a woman and I'm complaining about an issue, I'm not going to be perceived to be whiny and a loser and, and a failed man. So, I mean, there's all of these advantages that I have as a woman who's doing this and talking about these issues. But I've never actually said, I need to acknowledge my privilege, or, and I've never said I speak for all men. I've never said I'm not going to choose not to speak to this because I'm not a man. I have the ability to empathize with other people. And, you know, some men may disagree with my take on things, and they're entitled to. Lots of men don't. And lots of men agree with what I say. And so it's essentially like I'm just here to tell my truth as I see it, based on my ability to empathize with the men and women around me. And so, I mean, like the whole idea of, you know, I'm a white female and I'm straight. Well, I'm not straight, but I'm a white female and I'm, you know, okay, and I'm privileged, you know, and therefore, you know, you can take everything that I say with a grain of salt or some shit. I don't even know what that is. Like, how is that supposed to qualify what they're going to say next? Yeah. Are they just coming out and saying, so I'm probably full of bullshit? You know, I'm a white straight male, so I'm probably full of bullshit, or you can disregard everything I say, or I'm incapable of empathizing with people and walking in their shoes and seeing where they're coming from. Like, what does that even mean?
Yeah, to me, when I hear this privilege thing, right, the first thing that I would say is, of course, I have a different perspective than somebody else, right? And they have a different perspective than me. And I don't know what it's like to walk in their shoes. I can imagine a lot of things about that, right? I can imagine walking down the street with a lot of people giving you attention that you don't want. Yeah, I've never experienced that, right? And when I think about golden rule in terms of straight harassment, right, is just saying treat people like you'd want them to be treated. Well, I want women coming up to me saying, hey, have sex with me on the street. I would love that, right? But at the same time, right, I can imagine what it's like to walk into the prison yard for the first time and having people approaching me that I don't want to have sex with. And, you know, that I would be very intimidated by people who, you know, some of them would probably have the ability to take it by force if they wanted to. And that, right. You know, I can imagine what that's like, and it's terrifying. And I would not want to experience something like that. So, you know, I got a little bit sidetracked.
That's a really good analogy. Right? Even though I would, you know, I would say, okay, it is a pretty, but sometimes analogies need to be exaggerated in order to be fully understood. And I totally get that. That's actually a really good analogy that, you know, like you're being approached by a bunch of people that, or, you know, a gay bar.
Yeah.
You know, if you go in with a gay friend into a gay bar and you just get constantly hit on by a bunch of gay guys, right? These are not people that you want to have sex with. You know, and they are men, and so they probably would be able to, you know, at least give it a college try to get it out of you by force, right? So, you know, like absolutely, I think that's complete. But again, I think that feminists have a very difficult time putting themselves in the position of being male and never getting female attention. And the only way that they're ever going to get female attention, a lot of these men, and I'm going to come out and say it, you know, because all of the social experiments with catcalling and street harassment and stuff like that show that it's much more prevalent among low status men, minority men, men in bad neighborhoods, right? And these are not necessarily men who have sexual opportunities, you know, presenting themselves all the time because they are low status men. So when you are a man in that position, you're never going to get female attention unless you provoke that attention, right? And I don't think they're going about it the right way. I think that they're actually going about it the absolutely wrong way, at least in terms of what's going to be successful for them.
Yeah.
But at the same time, to look at men in poor neighborhoods, poor urban neighborhoods, and that was one of the things that 12 hours or something that woman walked through New York City, right? And 90% of the harassment she got, because some of it was just good morning and you look great and stuff like that, but 90% of the actual men approaching her were minority men in poor urban areas of the city. This was not happening on Wall Street, you know, or in that area. It was happening in places where men don't have many prospects economically, sexually, you know, maybe even to have a roof over their head for the night, right? Like,
well, sexual prospects are directly proportional to economic prospects for men, right?
That's right. for men. Yeah. So essentially, to put yourself in this, you have to actually be able to look at both sides, right? Because men only do this because women won't. Women will not approach men unless they are in the top 10 to 20% of men. Lots of women approach George Clooney. Lots of women approach Brad Pitt. Lots of women approach Tiger Woods, right? I think Bill Burr put it like, I don't walk off the golf course and there's a busload of Scandinavian women all willing to run down the freaking hill, with their paint on and their skirts up like Braveheart, right? Ready to jump on my dick right in front of my wife, right? But Tiger Woods does.
Yeah.
But it's the distribution of female attention is so skewed. And there's been all kinds of stuff like some of the stuff that the data that OkCupid website has collected in terms of how women rate men versus how men rate women. When you look at the attractiveness bell curve, right? And you ask men to rate the women on the site, their bell curve is pretty much the same bell curve, right? But when you ask women to rate the men on the site, their bell curve looks like this.
Oh, yeah.
And it's like 80% of men they consider to be below average, and only the top 20% are average or above average. Right. So, I mean, when you look at the reality for a lot of men, they're never going to be asked out on a date by a woman, right? They're never going to be hit on by a woman, right? It's just not going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
And to say that, oh, well, there is no situation in which a man should be allowed to approach a woman. She does. And if he does, she doesn't owe you eye contact. She doesn't owe you her time. She doesn't owe you a smile. She doesn't owe you a word. It really does feel like the people who have inherited wealth, telling the serfs that, they're not allowed to, you're not allowed to even look at me as I pass by, right?
Yeah.
Lower your eyes.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you have a point.
So, I mean,
I think there's
it's a complicated problem.
Yeah. But there's
it's such a complicated problem, but it's not going to be fixed by kind of buying into this whole idea that men feel entitled to sex. There are some men who feel entitled to sex. Ironically, they tend to be, as we have been learning over the last little while, they tend to be the men in that top 10 to 20% of men.
Interesting.
Right? In terms of either attractiveness or earnings.
So the ones who already are getting a lot of sex feel entitled to it. I guess that stands to reason. That is surprising, but it probably shouldn't be. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's just you just have to look at it and kind of try and encompass the entirety of the problem. And once you encompass the entirety of the problem, then you sort of decide that what kind of people would ask me, what kind of system do you want, right? What would your ideal world look like? And I'd be like, I don't fucking know.
There's not an easy answer. Yeah, absolutely. So my dad is a hunter, right? I mean, I could almost say that he's obsessed with wildlife, right? And these majestic, beautiful creatures, the North American elk, right? The wapiti, right. They are amazing animals that. They herd, right? And there's one dominant male that mates all of the females, right? And when they go into their mating season, the rut, right? The largest, male with the biggest antlers and the biggest body chases away all the other males, and that's that's the way it is, right? It is the uneven distribution, and that strikes me. It's really kind of interesting to see the way that dynamic works in wildlife, and we're really not that different. This
is why I'm so obsessed with bonobos, chimpanzees, and humans, and how the way we organize ourselves compares. There was just a study done this year indicating it was a counterintuitive finding, because bonobos are reputed to be hippies. And free love and all of that, right? And so everybody's having sex with everybody else, and it's just one big orgy all the time. When you're not eating, you're fucking somebody. And all of the males seem to have, some sexual opportunities. And what they have found is that the distribution, and it's completely opposite with chimps. Chimps are basically, they are kind of like the Wapiti. They live in these big groups, maybe 120, 180 individuals. All of the males are related to each other, which is why they tolerate each other. So you have lots of subordinate males hanging around, but the dominant males tend to monopolize the females, and they chase, during estrus, they chase all of the other males away and mate guard like mad and all of this, right? And so they monopolize the reproductive opportunities. But because they're living in these groups, what you have is you have essentially maybe 6 dominant males. They each have harems of 5 or 6 females each, right? And those 6 dominant males are splitting the reproductive opportunities fairly evenly between them. That's about 90% of all of the children, all of the offspring. And then the subordinate males manage to sneak off and do some stuff on the side, and manage to sire about 10% of the offspring. Right. But with bonobos, it was believed initially that their reproductive spectrum, I guess, in terms of siring offspring would be much more even. It would be even, almost as even maybe as humans, which is still not perfectly even, but that it would be much more evenly distributed between the males. What they found was that 60% of the offspring in the group that they studied were sired by one male.
Wow.
60% sired by one male. And the rest it was mostly dominant males, but you had essentially one male dominating almost the majority of the reproductive capacity of the group. So, I mean, this it was an unexpected finding. But it really is about females favoring those particular males. And when they have the choice and all of the freedom and all of the ability to do so, and they are unencumbered by things like relying on the provisioning of a male, right? Because one human male wouldn't be able to marry 60% of the women in the world, right? And sire 60% of the, you wouldn't ever, because he has to support them, right? There's an expectation of provisioning on the part of the men who sire children. And with bonobos, that doesn't exist. All of the mothers are single mothers. So they are free to not take into consideration, is this going to be a good father? Is he going to support me? Is he going to share food with me? Is he going to help me with my offspring? Is he going to socially groom me? Is he going to, be all of these other things? All he is to her is sperm. Yeah. Right. And so she's perfectly free and unencumbered by any other considerations to go and choose that one male.
Yeah. You read the Old Testament and you see these stories of King David and Solomon having these hundreds of wives and all of that, right? Yeah. I guess that's another form of that enormous harem that was cared for out of their largesse, the great wealth.
Well, that was the main difference. That's the main difference between a chimpanzee or a bonobo harem and a human harem, is there's an expectation that Solomon and King David actually feed and clothe and shelter their wives. Yeah. Right. And take care of all of their offspring. That's actually quite unprecedented in the animal kingdom in terms of social species that organize themselves into multi-male, multi-female groups. So
yeah, it's interesting. Yeah. So I said in the first episode of this podcast, when I was talking about my reservations about feminism, and I think I've reinforced this even more, that my view on feminism is that it is a violation of the 5th habit, referring to Stephen Covey's The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, the 5th habit being seek first to understand and only then to be understood. And I think that feminism is a case in point of a deficiency of that, right? As we've talked about, that it is a demand for understanding from males without reciprocation, and I think that is not absolutely true, but I think that is a trend. I guess what I'm trying to determine is, is the men's rights movement the same thing, or is it actually something different? And I think, you've given me a lot to think about in terms of ways that might not be the case, right?
I hope so. Like, I don't think every MRA has ever, like, I have come out and said things, and Harry Crouch, who's been the president of the National Coalition for Men for the last like 17, 18, 20 years, something like that. He said, wow, I never actually thought of that. You're right. So, I mean, like, I don't think that, when you I want to understand what the feminist position is, right? And it's very difficult to understand because it is so, it's very shiftable. And it's kind of woo. It's like spaghetti, and you can just mold it into what you need at the time. And, but, like, I wouldn't say that all MRAs are going to be, I'm going to look at understanding women and women's position and then seek to be understood. I don't know that that's the case, because I can't speak for all of them. But I definitely, what I want to understand is the entire picture, right? So the totality of it. And one of the things that gets me about feminism is, because they make a claim that they understand how gender works in society. And yet increasingly from the 1960s and 70s on, the lens that they have chosen to examine these, because there's 4 or 5 different sociological lenses that you could use, utilitarianism, blah, 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 right? But the lens that they choose to use is conflict theory, right? Which came out of Marx and all of that, right? And so to look at everything in terms of every relationship is a power relationship where one party has more power than the other. And therefore one is privileged and the other is oppressed. And that's how they see men and women existing in society, through that one lens, with men always privileged and women always oppressed. And
which is questionable. I think there's a lot of reasons to question who has the power in relationships between men and women.
Exactly. And not just who has the power in individual relationships, but who has the power in, like, people say, oh, well, it was the suffragettes that gave you a voice. And I say to myself, well, who gave them a voice? Right? Because obviously they had a voice, and are you aware that Susan B. Anthony, and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, they were key abolitionists. They were in the temperance movement. They managed to convince most of the US to prohibit alcohol, right? Because all of the convincing was done in the decades leading up to that decision.
Sure.
Right? The decision was made almost immediately after women got the vote, but there was a lot of political lobbying going on. And a lot of it was women-led. And, the Women's Christian Temperance Union, you think that they didn't have a political voice? Do you think that the women's petition to ban coffee in 1674, that women believed at that time that they didn't have a voice, that they could not get the attention of the King of England and convince him to ban coffee? When, why would they have written this petition if they thought that they didn't have a voice?
Sure. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so I'm like, okay, so I have to thank the suffragettes for something that the suffragettes didn't do. Right. Oh, I have to thank them for getting me the vote. Well, who signed in? Like, did they fight a war for it? No. Right. They asked for it. They lobbied for it. They pushed for it. It was given to them by the men who were in power. Right. And it was given to them only after the majority of women wanted it rather than rejected it.
Yeah. Well, that's the other thing that I think I see with feminism is this antagonism of men and women, right? This eternal struggle that they see us locked in. And I keep hearing that, because a lot of narcissists in Washington, D.C. have my gender and perhaps a similar skin color to me, that I have a lot of power, right? And in fact, I think I have very little in common with any of those narcissists in Washington, D.C., except maybe 1 or 2 of them. I don't see how those people give me any power.
No, no. And I mean, like when they say, well, we still haven't had a woman president. And I'm like, yeah, but we've had several feminist presidents, haven't we?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And we've never had an MRA president, mind you. And we've never had a single politician elected on a campaign based on men's issues ever. Right. The only one that I know of who comes even close would be Philip Davies in Shipley, I believe, in the UK, right? Who openly and actively and consistently speaks to men's issues and wants to, he actually was just appointed to the Equalities Commission. And he wants to, it's called actually the Women and Equalities Commission. And he wants to remove women or add men to the title of the commission, and he wants to bring men's issues into that body. But even he doesn't run completely on a platform of I'm here to advance the rights of men. But feminist politicians constantly, you know, I'm here to protect abortion rights. I'm here to advance the status of women. I'm here to promote, you know, this, that, and the other for women, right? Male and female politicians alike, right? Yeah. I have never seen someone successfully campaign for public office saying, I want to make things better for men, right? In this area, that area, the other area, they'll say for the working man, right? Yeah. They'll say for middle-class men, maybe, or union men, but mostly they'll say middle-class men and women, working men and women, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
yeah. So I'd like to get you to address something else, and then I think we can wrap up here. So,
okay.
You know, a lot of the criticism of the MRAs is either you know that there's an admonition, or well, misogyny, right? I guess is one of the things, an admonition to violence against women, and rape apologism, right? Is that completely nonsense, or is there something to it?
Okay, well, violence against women. You know, when you say, you know, equal rights means equal lefts, right? When you say that a woman should not have a license to just go around hitting a man and expecting to never be hit back, those kinds of things, you get accused of advocating violence against women. When you say that some women do indeed lie about rape, and we know this because it's happened, right? It's not something that has never happened in the entire history of humanity. It's happened. Yeah. That some women lie about rape, that we need to uphold due process of law, we need to preserve the presumption of innocence and all of these things, right? That means you're doubting the victim, you're blaming the victim, you're engaging in rape apologia, and all of these things. When you talk about how women should actually take some steps to prevent themselves from being victimized, right? The way you would when you have a kid who's who's just got his driver's license. You remind him, like, remember to lock the car, don't speed, right? You know, don't drink, and if you do drink, call me for a ride, right? You know, whatever. And somehow I'm blaming him in advance for, you know, having his, you know, something stolen, his radio stolen out of his car or something like that. Because I'm warning him that, you know, there are bad people out there who will fuck with your car. Be careful, lock it up, keep your valuables out of sight, right? So they don't break a window. That would be blaming him in advance for being victimized, right? And it would be taking the blame off of the car thief, right? Off of the wrongdoer, right? So that's what they consider to be rape apologia.
Yeah.
Apologia. But those kinds of things. And, you know, like, we do have to, you know, Paul Elam wrote an article ages ago called Challenging the Ideology of Rape, where he actually talked about women who are teases, and women who are not only teases, but like they will flirt with a man having initially, from the word go, zero intention of having sex with him. And they will do it in order to get him to continue to buy them drinks and stuff like that, right? So they're profiting from that. They're profiting on an emotional level because they've got a guy who's drooling. And it always feels great to have guys who find you attractive.
Yeah.
You know, and try turning 40. You know, a hobo with twigs in his beard tells you you're pretty and you're like, yes, right? Okay. So, I mean, essentially it's flattering on the one hand. So it's psychologically, they're gaining something from it. And then on top of that, they're gaining free drinks. They're, you know, and the guys, and then these women act surprised when every once in a while, these women who engage in this on a regular basis, every once in a while, 1 in 100 or 1 in 20 or 1 in 50, right, of those men turns out to be a complete fucking scumbag rapist, right, who is not going to take their no for an answer, right? And, you know, are they asking for it? You know, like, well, they're certainly engaging in behaviors that make that more likely to happen, right? And looking at that, that's considered to be rape apology. So, I mean, you can't even say, you know, there are women out there, and studies have shown that 40% of women have engaged in token resistance when they fully intended to have sex with a guy, right? You can't even say that and acknowledge that exists without being a rape apologist. Studies showing that up to 60% of college-age women intentionally get themselves drunk in order to loosen their inhibitions because they have hang-ups around sex. So they intentionally get themselves to the point where they are, according to feminists, no longer legally capable of consenting in order to convince themselves to have sex with guys when they actually want to have sex with guys, because they want to go out and have sex with a guy, but they have to ply themselves with alcohol in order to get themselves to the point where they're comfortable enough to consent, right? And it's like, okay, so what do we do with that? Well, that's rape apology, right? You're blaming those women. And it's just like, can we please just look at reality here and the reality of women's role in these things, right? The fact that women make decisions, sometimes those decisions can contribute to a sequence of events that lead to negative outcomes. Are we allowed to say that? No, that's blaming the victim.
Yeah.
So it's, you know, like going around and hitting your husband over and over again, beating on him, throwing heavy objects at him and stuff like that, right? When he finally freaking can't control himself anymore and hits you back, right? Is all the blame on the guy, right? Is he the abuser?
Yeah.
That is domestic violence apology.
I see. Yeah. So I think you make a lot of good points on all of those. I think the thing about buying drinks for, the kind of leading on with no intent to have sex. I mean, from my perspective, if I'm buying someone drinks and I'm getting their company and we're having a social interaction, that's enough, right? There doesn't necessarily have to be a possibility for sex for that to be okay. I
would say you should tell her the next round's on you.
Yeah, well, yeah, and I think if
I did that,
actually
might get laid more if he did that.
If I did that, I would probably be more successful. And these are things that I could say now that I'm married and I am not doing these things anymore, and that I failed on miserably back when I was trying to get laid. But you learn a lot of things. If I'd only known then what I know now, right?
There you go.
But yeah. So actually, one more thing, right? You mentioned Paul Elam, and in the Red Pill, right? Cassie makes mention of an article that he wrote, basically about like beating a woman or something along those lines. And the explanation was that it was in response to an article about a woman beating a man. And I thought, well, that probably explains a lot. And I completely agree with you, right? The idea that I think I apply to both genders equally the idea that the initiation of aggression is is wrong, right? I will hit somebody.
Yes, of course.
Yes, of course. I will hit somebody if they pose a threat to me or my family, and I'm not going to worry too much about what their gender is. That's the only circumstance where I think I would be justified is in self-defense, and I don't think that necessarily has to be drawn on gender boundaries.
Right.
But the assertion, and I didn't find it fully satisfying, and maybe there's something more to it, and maybe you don't know, but apparently apparently that this was in response to an article where women were claiming with pride of abusing their men, right? And that to me doesn't justify, well, then it's okay to say something about, well, hitting women. Well, I think that would be, saying that, well, he started it, right? Which is something that I would.
Yeah. Well, did you read the article?
No, I haven't. And
oh, okay.
When you said Paul Elam, it came to mind that I wasn't satisfied.
Yeah. No. Partway through the article, probably about 2/3 down, he says, am I serious about this? No. Right. And he says not necessarily, something along the lines of not necessarily because I think it's wrong. Right. Because I don't think it's wrong to hit back when you're being hit. I don't think and because he's talking in that article about men whose wives are actually physically attacking them, right? That, go ahead and freaking, and maybe hit her hard enough that she won't ever physically attack you again, to actually be a deterrent rather, in the future, rather than just stopping the behavior right now. But he said, am I serious about this? No, not necessarily because I believe what I've said here is wrong, but because the moment that you do, you're going to be the one in handcuffs, right? And that's just the reality of the situation here. But, essentially, he wrote, back then, he was writing a lot of extremely intentionally controversial articles that were designed to get the attention of mainstream media. So he wrote very, very over-the-top types of articles. There was another one that was actually featured in the opening of The Red Pill that she did not address, and I really wish she had, because it's quite damning if you only look at the first few paragraphs of the article, and it's essentially him saying to women who believe that they have been raped that no, it's called "I'll decide if you were raped, not you," or something like that. And he's saying no, and the reason why is that, women have rape fantasies, they love to be dominated, and we know this, and therefore rape is really only something that can apply to male victims, because all women really deep down want it, or something. He was making some really fucked up argument like that. And then about halfway through, he says, are you angry yet? Right? Are you fuming? Okay. Are you super, are you ready to punch your screen? Because if I were you, I would be too, right? And then he goes on to talk about Mary P. Koss, who is a feminist rape expert and researcher. She was the originator of the initial 1 in 5 college women will be raped study, and she consults with the CDC on all of their definitions for the National Intimate Partner and Sexual Violence Survey, and she's very, very up there. And she has said in the past that it is inappropriate to consider a man who has had unwanted sex with a woman to be rape. That it is sometimes, men sometimes have the perception that they have been raped when they were ambivalent about their own desires to have sex with a given woman. So essentially, she was making the argument that men always want it, and therefore it's inappropriate to consider them victims of rape when they have sex with a woman when they didn't want to, because a part of them wanted it. So it was essentially, she's making the same argument. Women have rape fantasies. Women like to be dominated. So deep down, they really wanted it. So therefore, they can't be considered victims. Well, Mary Koss makes that same argument about men.
I see.
Right? So as a man, if you say no to a woman, for whatever reason, you're married and you don't want to cheat, you don't want to have sex with her because she has herpes, right? Whatever, right? You saying no and her forcing you or blackmailing you or saying, if you say no, I'm going to scream that you raped me, right? All of this stuff, right, that women can do in order to coerce sex out of men. And it happens a lot more than we think, just in general out in the public. There's all kinds of research out there pointing to it happening a fair bit. That can't be considered rape because the men really deep down on some level wanted that.
Okay. Well, those are
And
satisfying explanations there. I mean, it's kind of the same thing. It's caricaturing this position
yeah,
to then argue against it. So I think that is at least plausible and satisfying. And I'll go look at those articles to
all
evaluate that
right.
for myself. But yeah, I think that's wonderful. And just one
Yeah.
thing that I would add is that the thing about blaming the victim. I think you're right. It's we want to do everything we can to avoid having rapists in our society, and the
Yes.
reality that that's not the case, that there are still rapists there, means take some
We're never going to get
precautions.
down to zero.
I don't see any reason why those things are mutually exclusive.
Yeah, no, I agree. And, like I don't walk around like I am one of those people who is like, rapists are never going to not be around. Like there will always be rapists around. There will always be muggers around. There will always be, and I don't even live in a very nice neighborhood. I live in a neighborhood where probably the number one thing that keeps crime down in my neighborhood is the fact that the Hells Angels clubhouse is about 6 blocks away. Right. So criminals tend to not do too much in this particular area because the Hells Angels would object to them drawing the attention of police into the neighborhood.
I see.
Okay, so what we have, and still my 14-year-old, well, he was 13 at the time, got mugged in broad daylight on his way home from school, right? So I mean, like, we still have issues with crime in the neighborhood, but I have never walked around day or night in fear, right? I mean, there are people around in my neighborhood who do not look reputable, who, they do drugs, they don't, they steal things from, stole my lawnmower out of my backyard while I was in Australia. If it's not bolted down, somebody's walking away with it. But I still don't feel unsafe walking in my own neighborhood. And maybe that's partly me. I mean, like, we have a coyote roaming around here, and I don't feel unsafe about that either. But, you have your choice whether you're going to take adequate precautions. And it's kind of like the difference between fear and vigilance, right? When you're vigilant, it's not because you're afraid, it's because you're prepared, right? And because you're prepared, you don't feel afraid.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And what feminists, and one of the things that that Alison Tiemann has brought up a number of times, and that I'm going to bring up again, and give her full credit for the analogy, is that, imagine you have an elderly aunt, who lives alone, and there's a alarm system salesman, right, going door to door in this neighborhood of mostly elderly people living alone. And that door-to-door salesman lies to her about the crime rate in the neighborhood and about her level of risk, right? And tells her about all, home invasion down that way and a home invasion down that way and robbery over here and the whole bit, right? And it's all exaggerated, right? In order to sell her thousands of dollars worth of alarm system equipment. And she not only gives him that money, right, but she thanks him for helping her, when in reality he's just engaged in abusive and predatory sales tactics. And I think that what feminists have been doing because they do exaggerate a lot of their statistics, that 1 in 5, the most recent 1 in 5 college finding, was based on a response rate of 19%, right? And there's heavy selection bias there. People who were sexually assaulted would be more likely to fill out the survey than people who had not been, right? And somebody found that if you extrapolated it to the university population in general over 4 years, the results of that survey, then there was one statistic that could be compared against a known number, and that was the number of women who said that they had been sexually assaulted and had reported it to their school. And it found that it was off by a factor of 9. Right? If you projected it onto, there should be 9 times more reports disclosed by universities under the Clery Act
And
than
there are a lot
actually
of
exists.
explanations for a lot of that are not necessarily that it's just a disparate number that aren't necessarily true, but there's probably some of that too.
There is. Well, I mean, look at the response rate. Only 19% of the people who received the survey responded.
Yeah.
And so you're looking at these sort of exaggerated figures. And then on top of that, okay, college, well, the Department of Justice found that, yes, there are, 1 in 50 women a year or something like that in college will have experience of sexual assault, but the rate is actually higher among their same age peers who are not in school. So women on campus are actually safer than women who are not attending school. So why are we focusing so much of our attention onto campuses? Why aren't we looking at low-income neighborhoods? Why aren't we looking at, urban centers? Why aren't we looking at those places where women are often much more vulnerable than your average college, freshman? So this is essentially what I would like to see is, let's stop inflating statistics. Let's stop making things look worse than they are. Let's stop scaring women, and let's all just try and solve the problem and each take responsibility for our own actions and our own decisions. So, uh-oh, you froze. Oh, there you are.
My computer crashed. I had
to
grab my laptop to get on. So I'm sorry about that. But
that's okay.
I think we're about at the point of calling it good anyway. But
yeah, no, it's been 2 whole hours. So
it has. You know what? We could talk all day, but I think I want to thank you very much for being here and interacting with me. This has been a lot of fun, and I think like I said before, you've given me a lot to think about.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you for having me, and I will, if you want, clip a bit of this podcast and send it my way, and I'll post it on my channel with a link to the full.
All right, sounds good.
All right, awesome.
All right, take care.
Talk to you later.